So I'll introduce myself. My name is Antonio Haile Selassie. I'm the Section 508 specialist for the agency. I support the agency OCIO office for Section 508, provide technical guidance and training for the agency. Doug Pearson, your Section 508 coordinator for the center here, invited us down to give you a little bit of training on Section 508. So we're going to go over an overview of the law and the policy. What is Section 508 and why is it important? We're going to do a demonstration so you can see Section 508 in action. Then we're going to talk about electronic documents later in the afternoon. Give you a few best practices, demonstration, accessible Word documents, and conversion to PDF. So what is Section 508? So in 1998, Congress amended the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 to include Section 508, which provides people with disabilities opportunities to gain meaningful employment with the federal government and to reflect a focus on technology. Now, the Rehabilitation Act was enacted so that our facilities and our buildings were accessible to people with disabilities. And Section 508 was added later just to make sure that we had accessible technology as well. Section 508 requires that federal employees with disabilities and members of the public with disabilities seeking information or services have access to and use of information and data that is comparable to the access and use by persons who are not individuals with disabilities. The key here is federal employees and members of the public. That's the scope of Section 508 there. Now it covers Section 508 from a technology point of view. Section 508 includes just about everything, from your software, your computers, your telecommunications products, telephones, voice over IP, information kiosks, transaction machines such as ATMs, websites, multimedia, copiers, fax machines, lab equipment with embedded IT, even calculators, smartphones, for example. We had, in some cases, lab equipment would not have to be Section 508 compliant or conform to the technical standards, simply because it may not have IT associated with it. And many times we have to take those on a case-by-case basis and determine whether or not Section 508 applies. All right, we also have a NASA Section 508 policy which was just approved back in January. We were generally working off of the law itself, but we developed a policy to do a couple of things. The policy establishes procedural requirements for providing accessible information, electronic and information technology, with a special emphasis on implementation of Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. Section 508 requires federal agencies' electronic and information technology be accessible to individuals with disabilities. The policy is meant to aid in the understanding of Section 508 and to assign responsibility to key stakeholders in order to achieve and maintain compliance. In addition to making sure that we assign responsibilities to the areas or the groups that needed responsibilities, we wanted to kind of clarify some of the gray areas of Section 508. The standards were developed in 2000, the year 2000, were released in 2000 so that our technology has changed so drastically. We had to clear up some things, so we used our policy to do that. The NASA Section 508 policy applicability. The NPR is applicable to NASA headquarters, NASA centers, including component facilities, and its employees. It applies to E&IT, Electronic and Information Technology, acquired, developed, and maintained by or for NASA for use by NASA employees of other federal agencies, and the public on or after June 25, 2001. The document does not apply to E&IT acquired, developed, or maintained by contractors, solely to be used by contractors in developing products or services for NASA, and which has not been procured under a government contract. What that basically means is, if you have a contractor working on a website, for example, for you, or even captioning, or some type of multimedia production, those productions or that website would need to be Section 508 compliant when they deliver it to NASA. But the tools that they use to develop those products, the contractor does not have to use Section 508 conformant or accessible tools. It'd be nice if they did, but they don't have to. All right, the technical standards. United States Access Board published technical standards on December 21st, 2000. The Access Board actually developed the guidelines for the ADA, all the guidelines for the Rehabilitation Act and ADA they developed, making sure our ramps were a certain grade, making sure our countertops and desks were a certain height. That's what the Access Board was tasked with. They were additionally tasked with making sure that we had standards for E&IT, electronic and information technology. They broke it down into 6 categories. We have software applications and operating systems, web-based intranet and internet information and applications, telecommunications products, video and multimedia products, self-contained closed products, and desktop and portable computers. If you can imagine your smartphone, for example, or a smartphone or even a tablet device, software applications and operating system, check. Web-based internet information applications, check. It's telecommunications product, most of them, check. Video and multimedia products, probably a few that have that. Self-contained closed product. Is it a portable computer? It is. So it falls under literally all of these categories. Technology has changed so much that many of these standards are what we refer to as outdated. Technology has just changed so drastically. When they came up with these standards, trying to define 10 years from now where a smartphone fit into those categories, they didn't consider that. The great thing is they're actually in the process of refreshing those technical standards now. And actually they're at the end stages of those standards, developing that refresh. So we should be looking at some new technical standards very soon. That does not mean that these standards don't apply or don't exist, because applications and products that comply now will still be in compliance later. But we're going to have some new technical standards. Exceptions to Section 508. Has anyone ever here tried for a waiver for Section 508 or even heard of a waiver for Section 508? Okay, great, because it doesn't exist. Oftentimes I'll go to centers and they'll say, can we get a waiver for Section 508? Waiver implies that you're waiving the law itself, compliance with the law itself. You have to comply with Section 508. The great thing is within the law, there are exceptions, exceptions to conforming to the technical standards. So here are your exceptions. Certain systems related to national security and national defense. So a tank for the DoD does not necessarily have to comply with Section 508. E&IT acquired by a contractor incidental to a contract, we spoke about that. Making accessible would cause a fundamental alteration to a product or the agency's needs or requirements, typically highly specialized IT. So if you're procuring something, for example, that has a very specific need, like for example the shuttle, the space shuttle, you're not going to alter your procurement or whatever IT you're trying to put in the space shuttle to make it accessible if it's going to alter the space shuttle drastically, the fundamental alteration. Commercial non-availability. This exception, it's not really an exception, it's more of an applicability to the law. But Section 508 basically says that if procuring a product in the commercial marketplace, you have to make sure that you get the most accessible product that meets your needs. Let's say, for example, you need an email client for your center. Your center needs an email client, and you're going to look at several different email clients that meet your needs. So if you find that Outlook, Thunderbird, or some other email client all meet your needs, then you need to procure the one that best meets the Section 508 technical standards. So we are looking for the most accessible product in the marketplace. Because we understand, Section 508 understood that there are a lot of commercial products out there that meet our needs, but unfortunately the commercial products are not accessible. So it doesn't mean, in that case, they don't necessarily have to conform to all of the technical standards, but you want the one that conforms to the most technical standards. All right, and then another exception is products located in spaces frequented only by service personnel for maintenance, repair, or occasional monitoring of equipment. This is sometimes referred to as a back office exception or back room exception. But really it's like a phone closet. If you can imagine a phone closet with a bunch of wires and maybe some terminals that you can see some lights flashing, that's what this was intended for. Some people would say, you know, hey, my data center falls under this. Well, a data center, anything that has a user interface of any type does not fall under that exception. So even if it's a remote user interface, such as a data center or servers or something like that, does not fall under this category. Now, what about undue burden? Anybody ever heard of undue burden? Well, undue burden, a lot of times I get the statement that, you know, I just don't have enough money for my program to make this happen, or I have these videos that I need to have captioned, and we just don't have enough money. Can I apply for an undue burden? In most cases, that would be no. For Section 508, you must consider all agency resources available to the relevant program or component. So that means we're not only considering how much money is available to your program, but what the agency resources are to that program. Let's say, for example, we do have some videos that need captioning, and you need to have them posted on the AIMS website. Well, what would have to happen is first you'd have to contact Center Legal Counsel. Well, first you'd have to contact Doug Pearson here, your Center 508 coordinator. Then you'd have to get approval from Center Legal Counsel. And then you'd have to have approval from our agency chief information officer. And that's assuming that if they find that, hey, we need to have these posted on the website, then they're most likely going to have to find a way to make that happen financially. So it's a long process, and undue burden is very unlikely. Matter of fact, I was speaking to someone at the DOD, and they apparently were recently applying for an undue burden. And the situation was, and don't quote me on the numbers, but apparently they had a system that they needed to replace because it was inaccessible. Now, they were actually going to be replacing the system within the next 2 years or so, completely replacing the system anyway. But to make it accessible now would cost them nearly $20 million. They applied for undue burden, and last I heard, I don't think it was approved. So if you can imagine a $20 million system that's going to be replaced in a couple of years anyway, they apply for an undue burden, and they don't necessarily get that approved. Again, I don't know the outcome of it. It's very unlikely that if we're trying to get some videos captioned on our website, that's going to fly for undue burden. So why is Section 508 important? More than 50 million Americans report some level of disability in the United States. So has anyone here had any life-changing events, medical emergencies, saw their life flash before their eyes? Anybody in the audience? No? Okay, I did. I had, a couple of years ago, I had knee surgery. Torn meniscus. Actually, it was the second surgery I had on the same knee. Simple surgery, actually. It was just they just take a couple of scopes and clean it up a little bit and make it a little bit better. So got out of the surgery just fine. And then that evening, I kind of felt something in my calf. I didn't know what it was. It was just a pain. I thought maybe I'd pulled a muscle or something or whatever it was. But I felt something in my calf. So a couple of days later, I'm kind of laying down in the bed, relaxing, and you know, I feel this intense pain in my back. And I have no idea what that is. I'm just like, wow, this pain. And then I notice I'm just starting to have a lot of trouble. Every time I breathe, it just hurt more and more, like someone's just stabbing me in the back, and I don't know what this is. And I got to the point where I literally could not breathe. I'm just taking short breaths, just trying to get breath. get to the hospital, of course, took an ambulance and found out I had a pulmonary embolism. It's a blood clot that formed in the calf, which I felt, somehow got dislodged, went up into my lung. And, you know, from what I understand, 50% of people either die or become disabled from a pulmonary embolism. So I consider myself lucky. My life flashed before my eyes in that moment. Now, someone earlier was talking about, you know, they do rock climbing, you know, and yeah, he had a couple of instances where, you know, he had to catch himself and he's looking at the bottom of the rock quarry. You know, at any minute, he could have fallen down, broken his, you know, lost his hand. I could have had a stroke of some sort, maybe had paralysis of some type. Anything could have happened in a split second. Very simple surgery. And I come back maybe a few weeks later to my job, hoping that I have a place to work. And fortunately, because of Section 508, I would still be able to perform my job duties. So Section 508 is very important. Even though you may not be disabled now, you know, a lot of people say, hey, I have a group of 4 people, you know, and I'm going to have them working on this website or using this database or whatever it is. Does it need to be Section 508 compliant? None of them are disabled. Well, what if something happens to them tomorrow? Then you have 3 people who may not be disabled. And also, nobody has to disclose their disability. Some people, we were talking earlier about being colorblind. It's one of the most prevalent disabilities, if you consider a disability, around. And most people just make do. You would never know a person's colorblind half the time. So you may have 4 people in your office that you believe are not disabled. So let me give you examples of some disabilities. We have visual disabilities like blindness, weak vision, tunnel vision, dimness, extreme nearsightedness or farsightedness, and color blindness. We have auditory disabilities like deafness, hard of hearing, high-low frequency, progressive hearing loss, mobility and tactile disabilities like repetitive stress injuries, arthritis, stroke, spinal cord injuries, ALS, loss of anatomical parts such as eyes, limbs, or digits, and then cognitive disabilities. Section 508 does address a few cognitive disabilities, but cognitive disabilities can be so wide-ranging. Memory deficiency, attention deficit disorder, linguistic and verbal comprehension, math or visual comprehension, autism, and we know there's different degrees of that. ALS, stroke, cerebral palsy, and multiple sclerosis are examples. So the question is, okay, if I have a disability, how do I now use the technology that I once could use with no problem? If suddenly I had become disabled, how am I supposed to now use that technology? There are what we call assistive technologies, which allow users with disabilities to now connect to a computer, to other technology, and be able to still use it as they once did. So examples are, for example, for visual disabilities. We're looking at screen reading software. It's software that just reads the text available on the screen or the information available on your computer. Screen magnification software. Refreshable braille displays. Voice recognition software. I know a lot of people know Dragon Naturally Speaking or similar, or the new Siri on the iPhones. Those are examples of voice recognition software. Auditory disabilities, we're looking at textual captioning for videos, other visual cues, hearing aids, cochlear implants, and the technology needs to be able to work with those. For mobility and tactile, there are alternative and adaptive keyboards and mice, breath-controlled devices, head-pointing devices, screen keyboards and mouse emulation programs, voice input recognition. I was at, I don't know if anyone here has heard of CAP. CAP is an organization that provides assistive technology to federal employees. I was actually in their center where they do evaluations called CapTech. And they actually evaluate people with disabilities. It's actually located at DoD, at the Pentagon. And the reason for that is because it started there. The program started there, and it was for service service personnel who came home disabled. They would do evaluations of their disabilities and find technologies that would work for them. It's an exceptional program because their center, they had all kind of adaptive keyboards everywhere, and they try to figure out which one works best for you. If it's screen reading software, what software works best. It's a great center. Then we have cognitive disabilities. Examples of technology for that would be alternative and augmentative communication devices, adaptive keyboards and mice, voice recognition software and screen reading software. All that's dependent on the level of disability there.